There's a metal sitting in vaults under Switzerland, locked in central banks, melted into wedding rings, buried in pharaohs' tombs, and orbiting your wrist on a watch right now. It doesn't do anything. It can't feed you. It can't heal you. It can't keep you warm. And yet humans have killed each other over it for roughly 6,000 years straight. This is the story of how a soft, useless, shiny rock convinced an entire species it was worth more than almost anything else on Earth, not because it does something, because of what it doesn't do. And that might be the strangest part of this whole story. Let's start with the obvious question nobody really asks. Why gold? Why not some other shiny rock? Why not quartz, or mica, or pyrite, which literally looks almost identical and is so common it's called fool's gold? The answer starts with chemistry, but it ends somewhere much deeper in the human brain. Gold is one of the only metals on Earth that occurs in nature already looking like, well, gold. You don't need to smelt it, refine it, or process it through some complicated chemical reaction to get that warm yellow shine. Early humans could find a nugget of gold sitting in a riverbed, pick it up, and immediately see something that looked unlike anything else around it. It doesn't rust. It doesn't tarnish. It doesn't corrode. Bury a piece of gold in the ground for 10,000 years and dig it back up, and it will look exactly the same as the day it went in. Archaeologists have actually done this, by accident, more than once. The oldest known gold artifacts come from the Varna necropolis in modern-day Bulgaria, dating back to around 4600 BC. That's not a typo. We are talking about gold jewelry crafted by humans more than 6,500 years ago, thousands of years before the pyramids, thousands of years before writing existed anywhere on Earth. Whoever made those objects had no concept of money, no banking system, no global economy. They just looked at this strange metal and decided it deserved to be worn, buried with the dead, and treated as something special. And here's where the story gets genuinely strange. Gold has almost no practical use to a prehistoric human. It's too soft to make a useful weapon. You can't sharpen it into a blade that holds an edge. You can't use it to make a tool that survives daily wear. It doesn't keep you warm like fur. It doesn't feed you like grain. By every rational survival metric, gold should have been irrelevant to early humans. Instead, it became one of the most desired substances they had ever encountered. So what happened? Why did a species fighting for survival against predators, starvation, and disease decide that a soft yellow rock with zero nutritional or defensive value deserved this much obsession? Some researchers believe the answer lies in something called the rarity and persistence hypothesis. Humans are pattern recognition machines. We are wired to notice things that are unusual, things that stand out from the environment, and especially things that don't decay the way everything else around us decays. Wood rots. Food spoils. Flesh decomposes. Almost everything in the natural world that a prehistoric human encountered was actively falling apart, all the time, constantly reminding them of their own mortality. And then there was this one substance that simply refused to participate. It didn't decay. It didn't change. It looked the same in 1,000 years as it did the day it was found. Some anthropologists argue that early humans unconsciously associated this permanence with something almost supernatural. If everything dies and gold doesn't, then gold must be connected to something beyond death. This is why gold shows up overwhelmingly in burial contexts across nearly every ancient civilization that had access to it. It wasn't just decoration. It was a message sent into the afterlife. A signal that said, this person mattered, and we are giving them something that the earth itself cannot destroy. Now let's talk about Egypt, because nobody on this planet took gold more seriously than the ancient Egyptians. They called it the flesh of the gods, specifically the flesh of Ra, the sun god. This wasn't a metaphor used casually. Egyptian texts describe gold as literally divine material, something that fell to earth as a physical extension of the sun itself. That belief explains an enormous amount about Egyptian civilization. It explains why pharaohs were buried in solid gold coffins. It explains the death mask of Tutankhamun, 11 kilograms of solid gold, crafted for a teenage king who ruled for less than a decade and was otherwise a relatively minor historical figure. He wasn't famous because of what he accomplished while alive. He became one of the most recognized humans in history because of what was placed on his face after he died. The Egyptians controlled gold mines in Nubia so extensively that the very name Nubia is believed to derive from an ancient word meaning gold. They had functioning industrial-scale mining operations, complete with worker housing, water systems, and processing facilities, more than 3,000 years ago. This wasn't primitive scavenging. This was organized extraction on a scale that rivals early modern mining operations, all built around a metal with no functional use beyond looking permanent and beautiful. But Egypt wasn't unique in this obsession. Travel to ancient Mesopotamia and you find gold treated with the same reverence in temple offerings and royal burials. Travel to the Indus Valley and you find sophisticated gold jewelry crafted with techniques that wouldn't be out of place in a modern workshop. Travel to ancient China and you find gold associated with immortality, with emperors consuming gold flakes believing it would extend their lifespan, sometimes poisoning themselves in the process, because as it turns out eating metal is generally a bad idea regardless of how spiritually significant you believe it to be. This is the detail that should genuinely stop you for a second. Civilizations with no contact with each other, separated by oceans and mountain ranges and thousands of miles, independently arrived at the exact same conclusion. Gold equals power. Gold equals divinity. Gold equals something worth dying for. Nobody coordinated this. There was no ancient committee that decided gold would be valuable across the entire planet. Every culture simply looked at the same metal and reached the same conclusion in isolation, which raises a question that researchers still genuinely debate. Is the human attraction to gold cultural, something we learned and passed down, or is it something closer to instinct, hardwired into the visual processing systems of our brains the same way we're wired to notice red as a warning color or symmetrical faces as attractive? There's actual experimental research on this, and it's stranger than you'd expect. Studies on infant visual attention have shown that babies, who have zero cultural context about wealth or status, still demonstrate measurably longer gaze fixation on gleaming, metallic, gold-toned objects compared to dull-colored objects of identical shape. Now, this is far from conclusive proof of some genetic gold gene, but it does suggest something interesting. The specific visual properties of gold, its brightness, its warm reflective glow, the way it catches and bends light, might trigger something deep in human visual processing before culture even gets a chance to tell us what's valuable. Let's jump forward to something almost everyone has heard of but very few people actually understand. The gold rush. When gold was discovered in California in 1848, something happened that genuinely defies normal economic logic. Within a year, roughly 300,000 people abandoned their homes, their jobs, their families, and traveled thousands of miles, often by foot, often dying along the way, to dig through dirt in the hope of finding small flecks of yellow metal. The overwhelming majority of these people lost money. Historians estimate that the people who profited most from the California gold rush weren't the miners at all. They were the merchants selling shovels, tents, and supplies to desperate men chasing a fantasy. One of those merchants was a young immigrant named Levi Strauss, who started selling sturdy work pants to miners. You're wearing his company's product right now, probably, regardless of what you're doing while listening to this. The gold rush wasn't really about gold. It was about a story humans told themselves about gold. The promise that this specific substance could transform an ordinary life into an extraordinary one, instantly, without years of labor or inherited privilege. That promise was almost entirely false for almost everyone who chased it. And yet it worked, again and again, in California, in Australia, in South Africa, in the Yukon, because the story was more powerful than the statistics. Now here's where this story takes a genuinely dark turn, because the gap between the spiritual reverence ancient cultures held for gold and the brutal extraction methods used to obtain it across history is staggering. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in the Americas, they encountered civilizations, the Inca and the Aztec, that also valued gold, but for entirely different reasons. To these cultures, gold wasn't currency. It was the literal sweat of the sun, used in religious ceremony, art, and offerings to gods. The Spanish, operating under an almost opposite belief system where gold equaled raw economic power, systematically dismantled these civilizations specifically to extract it. Entire empires were destroyed, populations were enslaved, and millions died directly because of a metal that, again, served no nutritional, medical, or defensive purpose whatsoever. The mining methods used to extract gold throughout history are some of the most brutal labor practices documented anywhere. The mercury amalgamation process used extensively from colonial-era Latin America through to modern small-scale mining operations poisoned, and continues to poison, workers and waterways across multiple continents. Modern gold mining, even today, remains one of the most environmentally destructive industries on the planet, generating enormous amounts of toxic waste to extract relatively tiny amounts of usable metal. Producing a single gold ring can generate 20 tons of mining waste. 20 tons for a piece of metal that will spend its entire functional life sitting quietly on someone's finger, doing absolutely nothing. And yet, despite all of this, despite the wars, despite the slavery, despite the environmental devastation, gold remains one of the most trusted stores of value in the entire global financial system. Central banks around the world still hold massive gold reserves, not because gold does anything useful in a modern economy, but because, even now, in a world of digital currency and complex financial instruments, humans still fundamentally trust this one ancient, useless, beautiful metal more than they trust most things humans have actually built. So what is actually happening here? Some economists describe gold's value as almost entirely a function of collective belief, what's sometimes called a Schelling point, a shared assumption so deeply embedded across cultures and centuries that everyone simply continues believing it because everyone else believes it too. Its value built on consensus rather than utility, which sounds almost absurd until you realize that's also exactly how modern currency works. The paper or digital number in your bank account has no inherent value either. It's valuable purely because enough people agree it's valuable. Gold just happens to be a version of that same story that's had 6,000 uninterrupted years to prove it can survive wars, empires collapsing, and entire civilizations disappearing. So when did humans start valuing gold? The honest answer is somewhere in the deep, undocumented stretch of prehistory, long before any of the artifacts we found, probably the very first time someone pulled a nugget out of a riverbed and noticed it didn't look like anything else around it. The behavioral drive underneath that moment, the instinct to notice permanence in a world defined by decay, to associate rarity with meaning, to attach status and power to objects other people also desire, that drive is almost certainly older than gold mining itself. It might be as old as human status hierarchies. It might be as old as the moment our ancestors first looked at each other and started keeping score. What we do know is this. Every civilization that has ever encountered gold, independently, without coordination, across every continent, throughout every era of human history, arrived at the exact same conclusion. This matters. This is worth fighting for. This is worth dying for. The specific reasons changed. The rituals changed. The economic systems built around it changed completely. But the underlying behavior, the simple act of looking at a shiny, useless, permanent metal and deciding it deserved more value than almost anything else humans have ever made, that behavior was already ancient before anyone thought to write it down. There's something almost unsettling about that continuity. For everything that separates the modern world from the world of the Varna burial 6,500 years ago, the technology, the science, the entire architecture of modern civilization, there's this one thin, unbroken thread running straight through all of it. Someone, somewhere, is right now looking at gold and feeling exactly what a Bronze Age craftsman felt the very first time he held it up to the light. We didn't invent that feeling. We just inherited it.